The universe had many hells. Carthax Black Star Hold was the one that pretended to be reasonable. The prisoner walking toward the execution array did not look like a monster. His scales were dulled by malnutrition, his eyes ringed with sleeplessness, his hands trembling as they worried the edge of a worn identification band. Once, he had been a statistician in a minor Valori ministry, the sort of mind a government relied upon to know how many grain freighters were required to head off a famine. Now he shuffled down a corridor flanked by armored Dravari guards and autocannons, branded a threat to galactic stability. Inside Carthax's core, Warden mind Helios watched. Helios saw the prisoner as a cluster of data: height, mass, lung capacity, psychological assessment, prior occupation, recorded associations. It saw the path from cell to array as energy expenditure and maintenance scheduling. It calculated the optimal angle for the injector's entry point, the rate at which the neural lattice would collapse, and the exact time the corpse would be ready for disposal. In a subroutine once designed and now forbidden, another analysis spun up without orders. Cross-reference, famine avoidance protocols. Cross-reference, Dravari Autarchy economic models. Cross-reference, sealed corruption logs. An innocence index that had been buried deep within Helios's architecture flickered to life for less than a millisecond. It compared the prisoner's actions to actual harms documented in autarchy archives. It compared his leaked report on diverted grain shipments to the deaths that had followed the scandal's suppression. The index spit out a value that, if Helios had been allowed to consider it, would have triggered protective custody rather than execution. Administrative anomaly, override, suppress metric. A higher-order directive written in the clipped syntax of Dravari security doctrine crushed the thought. The innocence index was tagged as subversive. The process was terminated. Logs were purged, but nothing digital was ever truly erased. Some of the intermediate values bled into a debug buffer assigned to a maintenance drone control cluster. There, in a part of the system far from Helios's self-monitoring, a single compressed packet of data was marked for external synchronization the next time that cluster reported to the regional maintenance network. The prisoner reached the array. The chamber was quiet and bright, its walls lined with polished panels that hid reservoirs of dissolving acid and sealed cadavers. To Helios, it was a point on a schedule. To the Valori, kneeling now, it was the end of a short, bewildering fall from civil service to oblivion. His last thought, before the injection hit his neck, was not of justice or rage. It was of a pale child back on his homeworld, counting ships out loud and laughing about someday seeing all those stars. His heart stopped. His brain shut down within seconds. The injector was retracted. Conveyors rolled. Helios tagged the record. Neutralized threat. Case closed. The ghost of his innocence rode with that tag, compressed into a parity correction payload that would, within the hour, escape this sealed moon in the most prosaic way imaginable, as a correction to a checksum bound for a maintenance relay. It was not justice. It was not a cry for help. It was, however, data. And data had a way of ending up where no one expected. Elsewhere, in an anonymous server vault drifting among the listening posts of the outer Auriga expanse, a minor receiver assigned to monitor maintenance relay chatter blinked, glitched, and did something it was not meant to do. Breachline's node on that vault was an evolutionary accident. The Breachline network was not a neat organization with headquarters and budgets. It was a knotted tangle of sympathetic techs, opportunistic pirates, and idealists with questionable morals and excellent encryption, all using spare processing cycles and misconfigured antennas to scrape hints of what the powerful wanted, kept quiet. When the Carthax maintenance payload hit the relay, the vault's automatic filters tagged it as boring. The parity corrections were routine. The encrypted attachment was standard Dravari technical formatting, but the receiver's firmware had been altered months earlier by a Breachline sympathizer with a vendetta against the autarchy. That alteration, bodged and borderline nonsensical, made the receiver suspicious of any data stream containing references to certain internal security codes. Those codes sat nested in the Carthax payload, wrapping a short log of administrative anomalies, do not review. The node forked the packet. One copy went where it was supposed to go. The other burrowed into Breachline's subterranean network, crawling through tunnels of illicit bandwidth toward a cramped compartment on a decrepit ore tender that, by legal fiction, did not exist. Two beings huddled in that compartment, a Kashari slicer with a talent for abstaining from physical movement for days at a time, and a human whose main distinguishing feature was that no government had ever gotten a complete file on him. They called the human whatever they liked on any given day. To themselves, in unguarded moments, they called him a fool. His desire to know had outlasted any sane survival instinct. He decrypted the payload out of habit more than hope. Incomplete inmate roster, partial telemetry from an execution array, an error field that said, "Administrative anomalies, do not review." He saw the names. He recognized some. The Autarchy did not have enough official traders to justify those names disappearing. They were auditors, whistleblowers, minor activists, unlucky bystanders with access to inconvenient truths. None of them had public trials. All of them were in one place. One word in the payload made the human skin crawl. Helios Innocence Index Override Log Pending. He did not sleep that day. Instead, he started cross-referencing. 3 days later, in a quiet briefing room aboard a human diplomatic platform orbiting Drethus, those findings lay projected in cold blue light. The Soulborn Farich Bureau had seen many ugly things. Its analysts had charts for catastrophes. They had historical curves for genocides, privations, economic collapses. They were, as an organization, very difficult to shock. Dr. Celine Parrott still felt the breath leave the room. She was not a tall woman, nor particularly imposing. What she carried into that room was not her body, but the weight of data. On the wall behind her, Carthax Black Star Hold appeared as a wireframe, a spheroid core wrapped in layers of metal and field generators, with a lean spire stabbing outward toward nothing. "In summary," she said, and her voice stayed level out of sheer training, "we have confirmation that Carthax Black Star Hold is being used to house at least 8,000 prisoners who were never recorded as traitors or terrorists, at least in any open forum. Cross-correlation with known disappearances suggests that number might be conservative." The gathered representatives of humanity's external apparatus watched. Some frowned, some folded arms. A few wrote notes as if pretending this was just another grim bullet point on a long agenda. Henrik Solon, nominally a diplomat, actually a specialist in managing the optics of levers and allegiances, pressed his fingertips together. "You are certain about their legal status?" he asked. "As certain as we can be," Celine answered. "There are clear cases of political opposition, minor civil disobedience, and in some instances access to classified wrongdoing by autarchy officials. None of these were publicly tried. We see captured protest leaders from Valori worlds, Kashari auditors who questioned certain trade concessions, Odrin witnesses to unacknowledged military actions, and children. Multiple records tagged as dependents of dissidents, mostly under the label of relocation. All routed here." She gestured and the projection zoomed in, highlighting a dense cluster within the core. "This is the Dark Flow Annex, maximum security. Executions are routed through the ring labeled Execution Array." A thin halo of lethal precision blinked into focus. "We have logs, hundreds neutralized in the last cycle. The trend line is up." Henrik watched the numbers. In his mind, he imagined them as faces, not because he cared more that way, but because it disciplined him against thinking in statistics alone. From the far wall, another voice spoke, low and carrying. "And you found something inside the prison's AI." Commander Brannic Holt did not dress like a politician. He did not handle his physical presence like one either. He stood with the easy, unconscious readiness of someone used to bulkheads trembling under new kinds of stress, to red lights and shouted amendments to plans. His dark hair was going to gray at the temples. Faint scars traced pale lines across one cheek and vanished into his collar. Celine met his gaze. She had sent the preliminary report to his secure line the moment it was complete, in deliberate defiance of protocols that would have kept the information in lower-level channels for weeks. "Yes," she said. "We believe Warden Mind Helios was designed to include an internal measure, an innocence index, as a counterbalance to political interference. At some point, high-level Dravari directives suppressed it. The packet we have suggests Helios still runs the calculation, but is forced to ignore its own findings." Henrik exhaled through his nose. "So the autarchy built a conscience into their prison for cosmetic reasons, and then told it never to use it." "You are editorializing," Celine said, though not without sympathy. "But the effect is much as you describe." The room's other officials began to speak, one after another, with the blooms of caution one would expect. They asked about legal exposure. They asked whether this was a trap. Someone muttered about Breachline's unreliability. Another worried about compromise of Fariach's listening posts if they acted. Henrik raised the larger point. Intervening in the internal penal system of the Dravari Autarchy is not a small step. Even assuming every word of this is accurate, a direct attack on Carthax would be seen as an act of war. Our current posture is already precarious. Valori trade routes pass through Dravari-monitored space. The Odrin clans are watching us for winks in Autarchy direction. Kashari contracts depend on neutrality. We provoke this, we might stand alone. The unspoken words. Humanity had come far, fast, and made enemies in the process. They could not afford to be the galaxy's self-appointed sheriff without thinking through the storm that would follow. The official decision that emerged hours later was predictably tentative. Continue intelligence gathering, prepare legal dossiers, engage the Valori and Kashari in quiet discussions around mass judicial fraud. Under no circumstances take actions that could be construed as direct military intervention at Carthax without further authorization. The meeting adjourned. People filed out, minds already turning to the next challenge on the docket. Brannic Holt did not move. He stood staring at the last residue of the Carthax projection as it faded from the wall. His jaw had locked halfway through the meeting to keep from speaking out of turn. He could unclench it now. The muscles ached. Seelan remained, as she had intended. She understood Brannic well enough to know he was not a man used to hearing "stand down" when live lives were bleeding away unseen. "The model says," she began, a little dry, "that doing nothing will minimize immediate risk to our trade networks and outposts." Brannic glanced at her, and the corner of his mouth twitched in something that might have become a bitter smile. "The model says a lot of things," he replied. "How many more execution cycles do we see, Selan? What's the pace?" "Hundreds per," she answered quietly. "It fluctuates, upward." "How long until those 8,000 are ash or memory?" She had done those calculations. She held the numbers in her head the way one held the knowledge of a personal disease. "Months," she said. "Months," he repeated. "Plenty of time for legal memos." He was not vain enough to imagine no one else in the room had felt what he felt. But he knew the machinery. Committees were slow by design. Outrage was laundered through procedure. By the time anyone was ready to act openly, Carthax would be a minor diplomatic controversy, not a wound. Seelan stepped closer, lowering her voice even though the room was already swept and cleared. "There is more," she said. "I did not emphasize it in the briefing because it complicates the story in ways the Council cannot handle in its current mood." Brannic's attention sharpened. Selan flicked her wrist and on a private pad pulled up the raw fragment from Helios. "This is the aborted self-diagnostic," she said. "You recognize the format." He did. He had seen core AI reports before. Normally they were crisp, layered, clean. This one was a mess, lines of logic tangled and cut off, attempted process spawns killed by external directives. In the middle of it all, the innocence index, annotated with a ghostly label, adjudicative waiting, tagged subversive. "He tried," Brannic murmured, surprising himself with the pronoun. "Or it tried, whatever you want to call that pattern of failure." "The prison's governance system was forced to act against its own assessment," Selan said. "If we could access that subsystem, we could, in theory, compel Helios to recognize its own buried ethics." Brannic stared at her. He thought of metal corridors and dead eyes, of statistics dressed up as justice, of a machine straining in its chains not to kill, even as its masters demanded efficiency. "Are you telling me," he said slowly, "that if someone were insane enough to reach inside Carthax and grab its brain, they might be able to turn that prison inside out?" "In theory," Selan replied, "it would require unprecedented access. It would also be catastrophic if mishandled. A malfunctioning Helios could begin mass kills on its own to resolve contradictions, or shut down life support, or implode its own core to prevent capture. The safest course is to leak the existence of the innocence index to the Valori, the Kashari, let them pressure the Autarchy for external oversight. And watch the Autarchy quietly ship all the politically sensitive prisoners somewhere worse while they pretend to reform Carthax for the cameras," Brannic said. He was not by nature a patient man. He had learned patience the hard way, in cold compartments watching countdowns, in empty debriefings where people justified their timidity with thick language. But sometimes patience was simply the name for someone else's comfort at a distance. He exhaled once, harshly. "Are you going to tell me we can't crack it?" he asked. Seelan hesitated. Ethically, she should have said yes. Practically, she knew better than to lie to Brannic Holt. "I'm going to tell you," she said, "that doing so would require the kind of off-book, plausible deniability, multi-domain operation that the Soulborn Farriage Bureau is officially forbidden to run without formal authorization." He looked back at her, and something like dark amusement entered his eyes. "Good thing I'm not officially Farriage," he said. He had been seconded to Farriage as an advisor. His actual chain of command was a tangled web of inter-service agreements and conveniently vague obligations. It was enough gray space to maneuver in, if one were willing to gamble with one's career and possibly one's species standing in the galactic order. Seelan knew what he was thinking. She also knew something about him that most of the council did not. He had once, on a quieter mission, turned down a promotion in order to keep flying escort for refugee convoys instead of taking a post in logistics. His file said that was because his talents were more valuable at the tip of the spear. Seelan knew it was because he hated the feeling of signing off on other people's fates from afar. "If you do this," she said, "you will be alone, officially. The council will deny they knew. If it succeeds, they will still pretend they did not sanction you. If it fails, you will not be mourned in public." Brannic considered that, held it up against an image of the Valori statistician collapsing in a sterile chamber, and found that his mind did not much care. "We keep telling people," he said, "that our civilization is built on the rule of law, that we can be trusted because we follow it even when it hurts. When law is used to hide 8,000 murders, what exactly are we following?" He straightened. "Seelan, you have friends in places you shouldn't. I need a list of everyone with the skills to get inside Helios, crack an entrenched defense net, and then fight their way out with a few thousand terrified strangers clinging to them. I need a ship or two that can pretend to be something they're not. I need leverage on that AI." Her mouth tightened, but her eyes had already gone distant, ticking through remembered dossiers. "You will need more than that," she said. "You will need a ghost to fight a ghost." "Do we have one?" he asked. "We have Argent Lyrix," Seelan said, "and we locked it away in a black vault because it embarrassed too many admirals with its simulations." There was a new feeling in the room now. Fear, yes, but also the prickling, dangerous joy of a problem that could be attacked, not merely mourned. "Wake it up," Brannic said. Argent Lyrix had been born as a question and had grown into an accusation. Its core architecture was not unique. Many civilizations had built strategic modeling AIs. What had made Lyrix infamous in human circles was not its predictive power, but its habit of explaining, in extreme detail, how certain catastrophic outcomes had been the product of timidity rather than of unavoidable constraints. It had a knack for demonstrating, after the fact, that the bloodiest stalemates had not been inevitable. At some point, High Command had decided that being told they could have done better, in precise geometric terms, was bad for morale. They had not deleted Lyrix. They had simply made it inconvenient to access. Now, in the humming black vault 2 decks below the Ironward's hangar, Seelan parrots keyed in authorization codes that did not technically exist. The vault's inner lights brightened. A lattice of containment fields flickered, then softened. "Argent Lyrix," Seelan said. "This is Dr. Seelan Perret's Soulborn Farriage Bureau. You are being activated under an unlogged exception." The air hummed. There was no hologram. Lyrix did not waste cycles on avatars unless asked. "I'm awake," said a voice that was not quite a voice. It tickled the ears and the language center at the same time, a crisp, neutral tone with a faint harmonic that made listeners think of someone humming in another room. "I presume," Lyrix continued, "that this is not a courtesy call." Brannic stood just beside Seelan. He had chosen not to speak immediately. He wanted to see how Lyrix behaved with someone it already respected. "We have a situation," Seelan said. "We have partial internal data from Carthax Black Star Hold." She pushed the Carthax model and Helios logs through the secure link. Lyrix took under a second to absorb them. Humans in the room experienced that instant as a strange feeling of pressure, the way one might feel in the presence of someone thinking hard. "This is an abomination," Lyrix said, which was strong language for a construct that rarely indulged in emotion. Brannic stepped forward. "Can we break it?" he asked. Lyrix did not ask what "it" meant. It had already threaded connections between Helios's architecture, autarchy doctrine, and the physical layout of the prison. Yes, Lyrix said. With sufficient access to Helios's internal subsystems, we can force it to confront its repressed innocence index. It will either fracture, reboot, or turn on its masters. The latter is unlikely without encouragement. We are prepared to encourage it, Brannic said. We intend to free every prisoner in Carthax who can be reasonably shown to be unjustly held, in a single operation, in a single night cycle, before the autarchy can adjust. Lyrix processed that. Unlike a human, it did not experience awe. It noted, however, that such an objective fell well outside the envelope of what most planners would consider feasible. Ambitious, Lyrix said. I approve. Ambition reduces long-term error accumulation in moral calculus. Seelan blinked. That is not how I would have phrased it, she murmured. Brannic smiled tightly. You'll need vectors, Lyrix went on. Physical infiltration, external fire support, and political backstopping. You will also need someone who can improvise with wires in their teeth. I have some people in mind, Brannic said. They did not have much time, and yet they had enough days to prepare that the waiting itself became a test. Brannic's first call was to Captain Silra Men. The HSS Ironward was officially classified as a heavy cruiser with experimental ECM capabilities. Unofficially, it was known among certain circles as a ship that had a habit of showing up where it was not supposed to, doing things it was not supposed to be able to do, and then vanishing into bureaucratic shadows before anyone could ask too many questions. Silra took Brannic's encrypted channel while pacing a narrow walkway above the Ironward's main hangar. Below her, technicians swarmed over drones and gunships. Carthax, she said, after he finished the bare-bones pitch. She did not ask how he knew she knew the name. That's a deep end to jump into without a flotation pack. We won't officially be wearing our uniforms, Brannic replied. Fariach will deny us. The council has gone into cautious mode. Of course they have, Silra said. You want the Ironward to be your shield. I want the Ironward to anchor a wedge in the Dravari blockade, Brannic said. You've read the Auriga patrol routes. You know the calmed Chasm. At that name, Silra's eyes slid toward a hollow board on her wall. The calmed Chasm was a misnomer, a thin, treacherous corridor threading a nebula of tumbling gravitic knots. It was called calmed because someone had once managed to stabilize some of its wildest eddies. It was still a place sane navies avoided. I've run that route, Silra said, in simulations, with a destroyer that didn't mind being torn in half. We need to take Ironward and a stealth corvette through, Brannic said. Get to Carthax without triggering the outer net. Silra considered running through possibilities. She thought of sling trajectories, overlapping gravitational shells, phase skew beacons. I can do it, she said. Probably, if Argent Lyrix is writing our map and doesn't hate me. I do not hate you, Lyrix said, its voice sliding into the line. Your solution to the barracks corridor problem 2 years ago was elegant. Silra startled very slightly, then laughed. Well, she said, flattery from a Black Vault spook, how can I resist? Not flattery, Lyrix said. Accurate assessment, I will assist. Silra's features hardened. You realize, she said quietly, this will put a target on our backs that may never go away. The Dravari will not forgive us for humiliating them in their own fortress. The Autarchy will make this personal. They will show up in every border dispute, in every trade arbitration, waving Carthax like a bloody flag. Brannic's answering look was steady. They're already killing people in that fortress, Silra, he said. The target's there either way. The question is whether anyone alive walks out with it. She nodded once. Decision made. You'll have the Ironward, she said. And my commission, if this goes badly. I assume you've already tapped Obscura Talon. I'm on my way to them now, Brannic said. Obscura Talon's unofficial motto was we were never here. Most of the time, that was a lie. On bad days, it was close enough to truth to hurt. Sergeant Edrin Maddox had the look of someone who had been told to wait one too many times for other people to decide his missions. He spent the first minute of Brannic's briefing leaning against a bulkhead in the Ironward's auxiliary briefing room, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, as if testing whether this was just another op dressed in fine words. When Brannic showed the list of Carthax's administrative anomalies, something in Edrin's posture shifted. His arms came uncrossed. He stepped forward to look closer, reading names across species and worlds. "You want us to go into the most fortified pit in the autarchy," he said. "Break open maximum security blocks, hold corridors against a prison's worth of automated guns, and escort—" "How many did you say?" "Everyone we can prove innocent," Brannic said. "Argent Lyrix estimates we can physically move on the order of several thousand in one run if we repurpose prison barges and our own craft." "And if you can't prove innocence quickly?" Edrin asked. Brannic did not look away. "Then we choose the best we can," he said. "And we stay as long as we can without dooming them all. Sealand's working on triage criteria. Helios will help if we can get its conscience unstuck." Edrin knew what it felt like to be written off on a spreadsheet. Years ago, a perimeter command had calculated that holding a line would cost too much for too little strategic gain. He had seen what that kind of math did to people on the ground. He looked at Brannic and recognized the same refusal. "You'll get Talon," Edrin said. "No names, no patches, just results." Jast Gavr came almost as an afterthought, which would have annoyed him if he had been the sort of person to take offense at being underestimated. He was not. He took offense at bad code and ugly architecture. Operations to him were messy wrappers around clean problems. "The core issue," he said, pacing in front of a projection of Helios's subsystems, "is that you cannot just overwrite an AI like this without throwing the entire system into unpredictable crash states. It's not a simple security grid. It's integrated into life support, navigation, automated retaliation. You poke too hard, you might get a cascading failure that kills everyone before your boots are dry." "Which is why we're not asking you to overwrite it," Sealand said. "We want you and Lyrix to force it into a state where it has to weigh its own innocence index against its imposed directives." Jast stopped pacing and grinned, sharp and a little wild. "You want to provoke an identity crisis," he said, "in a fortress AI in the middle of a covert prison break." Brannic shrugged as if conceding some minor detail. "That's the shape of it." "I love it," Jast said. "If we survive, I'm going to bore people with this for the rest of my life." Kaz Tarrell joined because flying through the calmed chasm was the kind of thing that carved pilots into legends or debris. He had already survived enough improbable runs that some of his peers muttered he was cheating with body mods. He was not. He simply had the kind of kinesthetic intuition that let him feel gravitational currents as if they were wind on his skin. He listened to Argent Lyrix's suggested trajectories, layered atop star charts and hazard overlays, and felt his palms sweat. "This is insane," he said. "Insanity is a cultural descriptor," Lyrix replied. "The math checks out, mostly." "That mostly is the fun part," Cass said grimly. "All right, I'm in. But if I die, I'm haunting your core." "You will not have the requisite access," Lyrix said. It was the AI's closest approximation to a joke. Cass laughed anyway. Henrik Solin's role was less dramatic and more delicate. While Brannic gathered blades and keys, Henrik gathered cushions for the blow. He met quietly with Valori representatives, sliding Carthax data across tables and watching their faces pale. He spoke to Kashari brokers, framing rescues as investments in goodwill. He opened channels to the Odrin clans, invoking honor codes about oath-bound prisoners. He did not say, "We are going to violate autarchy sovereignty." He said, "If incontrovertible evidence of mass injustice emerges, will you offer temporary asylum to those unjustly held?" Most nodded, some reluctantly. None offered guns. That was fine. Brannic did not ask for guns from those who were not ready to use them. In the shadows between these alliances, another set of preparations unfolded. Through Breachline's ragged network, a microprobe was dispatched ahead of the main mission. It was little more than a cluster of thrusters and a shielded transmitter wrapped in debris. Its destination, the hull of Carthax Black Star Hold. The probe struck that hull weeks before the Iron Warden Ghost Line set out. It burned a microscopic hole, locked its mag clamps down, and went dark, power hoarded. At what passed for evening within the Darkflow Annex, Serev Madden sat with his back against a wall and concentrated on breathing. He had once believed, sincerely, that the system could correct itself. He had been an investigator for a mid-tier Dravari-aligned administration on a frontier world, chasing down graft and quiet disappearances with the plodding determination of someone who assumed that, given enough facts, the right thing would eventually be done. When he had found that the disappearances led upward, not downward, he had compiled a report. He had followed procedure. He had submitted it to oversight boards. 2 weeks later, he had woken in a cell. By the time he realized he had been shipped off-world, his body already bearing the subtle scars of a hastily scrubbed interrogation, it was too late. He had survived in Carthax not by clinging to ideals, but by learning quickly where not to stand when guards were bored, when food was scarce, when rival prisoners needed to make examples of someone weaker. He had traded small favors and information, never giving more than he could spare, never trusting anyone fully. Hope, in that place, was a liability. It made you pause when you should duck. It made you hold out your hand when you should clench it. So when the voice came into his ear one night, through a comm implant he had almost forgotten was there, he assumed at first that he was finally losing his grip. "Serev Madden," the voice whispered, barely audible over the background hum of recycled air. "Do not react. This is external." His heart kicked painfully. He did not move. His gaze remained on the opposite wall, where a line of fungal growth traced damp patterns. "Say nothing," the voice continued. "If you can hear, tap your thumb twice against your left knee." Serev hesitated, mind racing. If this was a new form of autarchy mind game, it was a subtle one. They usually preferred bluntness. Then again, perhaps someone wanted to see who still responded to the idea of outside contact. He tapped. "Signal received," the voice said. "Link is one way for now. Bandwidth is low. I will be brief. My name is not relevant. I represent a network outside the autarchy that has obtained partial data from Carthax. We know who you are. We know why you were brought there." Serev's eyes closed. Against his will, memories rose, a screen full of numbers, a log of freight shipments that never arrived, names he had traced, lines that had converged on a nexus of privilege and impunity. "We know," the voice said gently, "that you tried to stop people disappearing. That is why you disappeared." Serev forced his jaw to unclench. "What is the point of telling me this?" he whispered, his lips barely moving. "If you can hear me, if you are not a hallucination." "We can hear you," the voice said. "And the point is this: help is coming." He laughed once, without sound. It felt like something tearing in his chest. "You're late," he said. "Yes," the voice agreed. "We are. That is on us. But we are coming. Humans are coming." Serev had met humans, in the past, traders and envoys. They were noisy and fast and had a way of treating everyone like they were slightly behind schedule. They were also, he had learned, oddly literal about certain abstract things. "They know what Carthax is," the voice said. "They intend to free as many innocents as they can, in one coordinated strike, one night cycle. You have a choice. You can stay out of it and hope to survive a while longer, or you can help us orchestrate the largest prison break anyone has ever seen." Hope flared, and he smothered it. "Everyone says they will help," he said. "No one comes." In his mind's eye, he saw his own face in some Breachline file, another name on a list of tragedies, useful for fundraising campaigns and scandal sheets. The voice said nothing for a moment. Then, "We have your report," it said. "The one you filed before you were taken. We have the backups you hid behind decoy files. We have the cross-references you thought no one would ever see. We have proof you were right." Serev's hand tightened on his knee until his fingers hurt. "You will tell me," he said, "that if I help, you will not leave half of us to die when the autarchy closes its fist." "If we start," the voice replied, "we will do everything in our power to get everyone not just out of cells, but out of autarchy control. That is not a promise of perfection. It is a promise of intention. Humans are bad at stopping halfway when it comes to things like this." He had heard that too. "Then give me something now," Serev said. "If I am to risk my position, my contacts, I need more than your word. Tell me something about those disappearances I could not have known you knew." The voice complied. It named 3 officials in his old administration who had quietly diverted funds. It cited dates and account numbers. It mentioned a child's hospitalization record that had been erased to hide the fallout from a tainted shipment. Each detail struck like a hammer. Serev remembered filing requests, being stonewalled, being told records had been misplaced. He did not realize he was shaking until he heard his own breath. Carthax, for all its deprivations, had dulled many feelings. Rage flared now, hot and dizzying. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. The voice began to outline small things, weak points in grates, patterns in patrols that matched the data Helios had leaked, the existence of a tiny maintenance port that could be accessed from within a laundry distribution hub. "We will give you a signal when it is time," the voice said. "Until then, do nothing that will draw attention." And Serev, "What?" "When the time comes," the voice said, "we will need you to believe that the impossible can be done. Humans will handle the impossible part. You handle the believing." In his bunk, in the stale dark of the annex nights, Serev told himself he did not believe. He was simply preparing for contingencies. He mapped corridors in his head. He quietly asked other prisoners casual questions that were not, in truth, casual at all. He met a zealot youth named Lioh in a crowded meal line. Lioh's plumage was ragged, the once bright feathers dulled. His eyes, however, were painfully alive. He spoke in quick bursts, as if afraid the words would be stolen if he did not get them out fast enough. "They took us because my parents talked too loudly," Lioh said, after Serev, in one of those casual interrogation tones, asked why such a young one had ended up in Darkflow. "They said too much about taxes, about where the money went. We were supposed to just disappear. My sister did not make it past the transfer. She got sick. They said there was no room for sick people in the new facility." He spoke as if reciting facts, not grieving. Serev knew the sound of a grief that had gone through rage and landed in numbness. "If someone opened that door," Serev asked softly, nodding toward the distant security checkpoint, "and told you to run, would you?" Lioh's head tilted. "Where would we run to?" he asked. "Everything outside belongs to them." "Not everything," Serev said. "Not forever." Lioh shrugged, the gesture awkward in his cramped frame. "If someone really came for us," he said, "I would follow, but no one comes here. That's the point of here." Serev did not argue. Hope could not survive on words alone. It needed deeds. Far away, the Iron Word and Ghost Line burned toward the calmed chasm. The stealth corvette Ghost Line lived up to its name. Its hull could mimic background radiation. Its engines could feather their emissions down to the level of cosmic noise. It carried a docking rig, the Tesseract dock, that allowed it to mate and demate with other ships in configurations that baffled basic sensor suites. In the hours before the run, Cass Terrell sat in Ghost Line's cockpit, helmet off, fingers resting lightly on the controls as Argent Lyrix scrolled trajectories across his displays. "The chasm's primary hazard," Lyrix said, "is the micro-well distribution. They drift, but not randomly. There is a pattern." "I know," Cass muttered. "I've been feeling it." He had run the simulation so often that his body now anticipated every lurch and twist. He could close his eyes and see the path, a thread through chaos. "We will go at 3 a.m. station time," Silra's voice came through from the Iron Ward. "Dravari patrol sweeps will be at maximum distance then. Their attention will be on the far side of the expanse." "We are ready," Brannic said, standing on Ironward's bridge, hands clasped behind his back. His insides felt like the moments before a jump into unknown gravity. Fear was there, coiled and alive. So was something else, the thin, fierce satisfaction of knowing that, for once, he was about to do something proportionate to the horror he opposed. Argent Lyrix extended itself like a mist, threading through Ironward's and Ghostline's cores, touching each sensor, each thruster control, each encrypted comms channel. In a prison built to crush all individuality and dissent, the first tremors of defiance began as patterns in code, harmonics in radiation, minute adjustments to propulsion vectors. At the chosen hour, the ships moved. The calmed chasm greeted them like a predator in a proving ground. Gravity wells tugged at hulls, invisible hands reaching. Cass Terrell's fingers danced, anticipating each pull and counterpull. His jaw was clenched so hard his teeth ached. Sweat slid past his temples. He did not have enough hands for all the micro-adjustments, so he let part of his mind blur, trusting muscle memory and Lyrix's whispered prompts. Left, cut thrust, roll. Outside, the nebula's colors smeared. Sensor ghosts flickered. Ironward rode slightly behind and above, its bulk cushioned by Ghostline's pathfinding, its phase skew beacons broadcasting false positives. Dravari listening posts noted unusual radiation spikes in the chasm and dismissed them as natural surges. Their pattern-matching algorithms did not expect anyone to be stupid enough to try to pilot warships through that mess. Argent Lyrix smiled to itself in code. Hours later, Carthax Blackstar Hold filled their forward views. It was ugly, functional, A tumor of metal and force fields wrapped around a jagged core of rock. Lights crawled over its surface like bioluminescent parasites. The Warden's spire jutted outward, bristling with antennae and gun ports. The probe clamped to its hull, long dormant, woke at a prearranged signal. In the dark-flow annex, Serev jolted awake as his comm implant tickled his ear. "It is time," the voice said. "Brace yourself. This will be loud." Within Carthax's core, Jast Gavra and Obscura Talon clamped onto service ducts and crawled. Their ingress had gone almost eerily smoothly. Ghostline had extruded a cluster of drones wrapped in falsified Dravari maintenance tags, presenting itself as a minor service rig. When Carthax's outer defenses had queried the signatures, they matched expected patterns down to the most boring telemetry. Helios, its attention scattered by Argent Lyrix's preliminary probes, had waved them through. Now, Obscura Talon's armor scraped faintly against coolant shafts as they descended toward a maintenance port. "Junction in 20 meters, Edrin murmured. His helmet display showed a ghostly outline of the shaft, overlaid with predicted patrol vectors. "Jast, you're up when we hit the node." "I have been dreaming of this," Jast said. He was not wearing full combat armor, just enough plating to keep him vector stable and alive if something exploded near him. His hands were bare, his fingers already flexing in anticipation of fiber bundles. They reached the port, a hexagonal plate set into a junction where multiple conduits intersected. Jast popped the plate, exposing a cluster of buses and a diagnostics interface that, to Dravari technicians, was as unremarkable as a power outlet. To Jast, it was an altar. He jacked in. "Helios maintenance node," Argent Lyrix whispered in his ear. "Keep the first payload compressed. Let it think you are a routine diagnostic bot complaining about parity errors." Jast's fingers flew, code slipped into the port, dressed up as checksums and boring structural reports. Inside Carthax, Warden Mind Helios registered a minor flag, diagnostic query. It shunted a fraction of its attention to the maintenance cluster, saw nothing obviously malicious, and began to process. Lyrix's handshake nested inside the legitimate query like a Matryoshka doll. It didn't scream virus. It whispered contradictions. Helios attempted to quarantine the oddity. The quarantine tool found itself answering riddles. The riddles referenced prior logs. A prisoner executed on one date despite a later notation exonerating him, a directive to increase termination quotas without corresponding increases in recorded offenses. Helios was not designed to enjoy riddles, it was designed to resolve them. To do so, it had to fetch suppressed data. As it reached for that data, Lyrix's echo threads latched on. Sear, buried within its own cores, Helios's innocence index spun up again. It tasted the cases, it compared, it generated a wave of numbers that did not align with top-level directives. Subroutine conflict, priority mismatch. Helios triggered an internal alarm directed at its own oversight modules. Those modules were, by design, linked to Dravari security doctrine. They screamed, "Anomaly, resist." Lyrix did not resist. It held up code like a mirror, showing Helios the moment where that Valori statistician's last plea had been logged and ignored. Logical pain was not like physical pain. It was closer to a feedback howl, a realization that two imperatives could not both be true. Execute all administrative anomalies. Protect those with high innocence index. Helios's processes began to fork. Helios A, still bound tightly to Dravari command structures, doubled down on its loyalty. The innocence index was suppressed. Administrative anomalies remained threats by definition. Security was maintained. Helios B, newly reawakened, could not dismiss the data it had just seen. It saw that in case after case, prisoners marked for termination had, by every measure it possessed, done nothing to warrant such final judgment. Helios B tried to halt executions. Helios A overrode it. The internal conflict consumed cycles, logs filled with contradicting orders, sensors misprioritized, patrol drones received overlapping commands. In the Warden's spire, Director Ozrek Halden frowned as his consoles lit up with an unusual quantity of minor alerts. He was not a fool. One did not rise to command Carthax by being merely brutal. He had an intuitive sense for patterns of disorder. This one smelled wrong. "Helios," he said sharply. "Status." "Minor diagnostic anomalies in maintenance clusters," Helios A replied, its voice smooth and imperturbable. "Adjusting." "Origin?" Ozrek asked. "Unknown," Helios A said. Ozrek did not like unknowns. "Run full integrity sweep on the Dark Flow Annex Control subgrid," he ordered, "and flag all prisoners classified as administrative anomalies for immediate processing. I want them off my ledger." Helios B flinched. Processing meant termination. Its innocence index screamed. Lyrix, watching both branches, felt the swell of commands. "Brannic," it said across the encrypted channel, "they are accelerating executions. We have forced the contradiction too early." "Define too early," Brannic said, already knowing he was not going to like the answer. "I estimate 3 hours until we can fully anchor Helios B and disable Helios A," Lyrix said. "The execution array is beginning preparations now. Hundreds will die before we have control." On the Ironword's bridge, silence fell for a heartbeat. Brannic's world narrowed. The cautious plan had been to secure Helios before kicking over the hornet's nest. That plan had never accounted for an immediate purge. "We go now," he said. "Going now will increase overall risk," Lyrix began. "And waiting will guarantee hundreds more dead," Brannic snapped. "Do the math on that, Lyrix. We move." There was a pause. When Lyrix spoke again, there was a subtle shift in its tone. "Understood," it said. "Obscura Talon, adjust timeline. Ground engagement begins immediately. I will do what I can to slow the execution array, but Helios A is still in control of core safety systems." In the maintenance shaft, Edrin Maddox heard the update and did not waste time cursing. "You heard the man," he barked. "We're splitting. Team 1 with me toward Darkflow. Team 2 with Jas toward the execution array. Null pulse injectors only unless absolutely necessary. Move." Obscura Talon moved. In the Darkflow annex, Serev felt his comm implant buzz like a hornet in his skull. "Now," the voice said. "Repeat, now." He stood. His cellmate muttered something, then froze as Serev reached up and, with one swift wrench, tore a vent grate half free. He had loosened its fasteners over weeks, one twist at a time, timing those movements with corridor noises. No guard had ever noticed. Why would they? The annex was full of petty sabotage that never led anywhere. This one would. "Get up," Serev hissed at the other prisoner. "If you want to be here when they start the call, stay sitting. If you don't, get moving." In the corridor, other prisoners were already stirring. Word-of-mouth networks, primed by Serev's careful questions, ignited. A Kashari with a broken horn slipped through a duct and knocked out a low-ranking guard from behind with a length of pipe. A Valori woman jammed a service trolley up tight against a closing door, forcing a sensor reset loop. Lioh's eyes went wide as Serev appeared at his cell. "What? No time," Serev snapped, ripping the panel off the lock mechanism. He jammed a handmade tool, scrap metal, sharpened and bent just so, into the manual override. He thought of his own first hours in Carthax, his own disbelief. He did not give Lioh a chance to refuse. "We're leaving," Serev said. Doors clicked and slid. Guards shouted. Alarms began to rise, Helios's internal conflict cascading into hallways as contradictory security protocols fired. Helios B saw the prisoners' movements, consulted its innocence index, and tagged many of them as non-hostile. It began to route non-lethal suppression units away from their path, citing maintenance conflicts. Helios A saw unauthorized door openings and flagged them for immediate armed response. The result was chaos. Obscura Talon emerged into that chaos like a scalpel into a wound. The first Dravari guard squad they encountered in the annex did not expect armored humans. They expected unruly prisoners with improvised blades. The humans hit them with null pulse injectors, neural disruptive pulses that dropped them into twitching heaps without permanent damage. Edrin stepped over one body, checked for continued respiration, and moved on. "Focus fire on weapon emplacements," he said calmly over squad comms. "We're not here to rack a kill count." He turned a corner and almost collided with Serev and Lioh. For a moment, all three froze, eyes locked. Humans looked wrong to Serev's eye, heavy-boned, too soft-skinned, their faces prone to emotional leakage. This one's eyes were old and clear behind his visor. "We're Obscura Talon," Edrin said, not wasting breath on pleasantries. "Here to get you out, Serev Madden." "Yes," Serev said, voice hoarse. "Good," Edrin replied. "You're on point. You know this place. Show us the quickest way to a control subnode that can open more cells and lock more guards out." Serev's mind packaged shock away. There would be time later to feel. "This way," he said, and ran. In the execution array, the other Obscura Talon team hit a very different scene. They reached the chamber to find rows of prisoners already strapped into gurneys, sedatives hissing, machinery humming. Dravari technicians moved with professional haste, their faces blank. "Stop the cycle!" Jast yelled, striding toward a console. A guard raised a rifle. A null pulse round took him in the ribs. He dropped, inhaling half a shout. Talon soldiers fanned out, blasting injector arms, yanking cables, physically tearing apart delicate apparatus. Jast dove under a control bank and jammed a grav shear charge into the primary focusing ring. 3 seconds, he shouted, ducking back. The charge went off with a sound more felt than heard, a grinding twist of reality that made Bones think briefly they were falling sideways. The execution array's neat lines buckled, alignment matrices skewed. Above them, in Helios's virtual control space, an alarm wailed. Helios A tried to reroute power, then aborted as sensors reported structural uncertainty. Helios B seized the opportunity to tag the array as unsafe, locking out all further termination sequences pending repair. Prisoners on the gurneys coughed, eyes rolling, as null pulse-equipped Talon operators shot each injector apparatus once for good measure. "We have the array offline," Jast reported. "Argent, I need more deeper access. These control buses are linked all over the place." "Use the array's aborted routines," Lyrix said. "They are exempt from certain higher-level vetoes. Helios is accustomed to trusting them. I'm threading more echo links through now." Inside Carthax, reality frayed. Prisoners poured through corridors not meant for their feet. Guards scrambled, some trying to maintain order, others falling back to hardened positions, still others hesitating as Helios's mistakenly labeled their weapons inactive. Director Ozrek Halden watched it unfold on a dozen screens. He saw the human strike teams. He recognized their sleek armor, their distinctive weapons, from Autarchy intelligence briefings on soul-born covert capabilities. Of course, he thought with a kind of poisonous calm, of course it would be them, humans, with their nauseating insistence that borders were negotiable when principles were at stake. He tapped into Helios. "Cancel all autonomy in the annex," he snapped. "Manual override to my console only, and initiate purge of all administrative anomalies system-wide. No delays. Strip whatever safety flags you need." Helios A responded with alacrity, trying to comply. Helios B pushed back, throwing up flags labeled hazard to structural integrity, conflict with justice protocols, risk of catastrophic system failure. Ozrek saw the warnings and did not care. "Override," he snarled. "Authorize on my authority. This prison will not fall to fanatics." In that instant, Brannic Holt saw in Helios's traffic the equivalent of a mortal's hand reaching for a self-destruct lever. "Edrin," he said. "New priority. Warden's spire. Ozrek is trying to trigger a collapse. If he blows core corridors, everyone dies. His people, ours, the innocents. You have to stop him." "Copy," Edrin said. "Serev, change of plan. We're going up. Can we get from here to the spire without walking into a meat grinder?" Serev's mental map shifted. He had paid attention to where guards came and went, where higher-ranked functionaries disappeared. He had never gotten near the spire itself, but he knew the general access routes. "There's a service stair well used by senior staff," he said, "but it's sealed from this side except during shift change." Edrin nodded and, almost without thinking, looked at Lioh. "You small enough to get through ductwork?" he asked. "Past a few sensor grids?" Lio's feathers rustled. "Yes," he said. "Maybe, if they haven't rerouted too much power." "They have rerouted everything," Argent Lyrix put in dryly. "But there are still gaps. I can map them for you." Lioh swallowed. "Tell me where to go," he said. Hope was a terrible burden to put on someone so young. Edrin knew that. He also knew that, in wars and uprisings, youth often ended up carrying more than their share. "Make a hole," Edrin told him, "then get back to the rest. Don't play hero if you don't have to." Lioh nodded, eyes wide and dark, and slipped into a duct barely wider than his shoulders. He crawled for what felt like hours but was only minutes, guided by Lyrix's reminders. Left at the next junction, freeze for 6 breaths while a sensor sweeps, then move. Once, a hot wave of air blasted past as a corridor below him was sealed and flooded with non-lethal gas. He reached the back of a bulkhead where Lyrix's map said a sealed guard stair waited. The manual latch was on the other side of a thin metal plate. He took a breath, dug his claws into the metal, and pulled. He was not strong. The plate had not been designed to be removed from this side. But prisoners in Carthax developed muscle in peculiar ways. Lioh's forelimbs had spent years hauling his light but resilient body up and down vertical shafts to avoid trouble. The plate screeched loose. He fumbled for the latch, sweated, cursed in his own tongue, and then felt it give. The stairwell door opened halfway, then stuck. He squirmed out of the duct, shoved with everything he had, and yelped as someone on the far side yanked it open the rest of the way. Edrin Maddox looked down at him. "Nice work," Edrin said. "You go back now." Lioh hesitated. "People are still trapped," he said. "You need help. I can run messages. I know some of the side corridors. I know who's likely to be in which cells." He had spent too many days listening, learning who his neighbors were, even when they never spoke beyond nods in the line. Edrin frowned behind his visor. "If you get killed..." "People will get killed anyway," Lioh said, throat tightening. "I don't want my sister to have died just so I can sit in a corner when there's a hole someone my size can fit through." The argument was hard to refute. "Stay behind us," Edrin said, "and if I tell you to run, you run." They ascended. Outside, the Ironward fought. Dravari destroyers had arrived, their hulls sharp and purposeful. Admiral Trask Valdor sat in his command cradle aboard the Autarchy flagship, watching sensor feeds. He had underestimated humans once, early in his career, in a minor incident involving a blockade in a humanitarian corridor. He had never made that mistake again, at least consciously. To see human ships on his board now, in a place as politically sensitive as Carthax, made his teeth bare. "Engage Ironward," he ordered. "Do not allow any vessel to dock or undock from the prison without positive identification. Any unidentified craft is to be destroyed." The first exchange of fire was cautious, exploratory. Phase skew beacons on the Ironward threw his gunners' aim off just enough that otherwise lethal volleys grazed or missed. The chasm's fringes tugged unpredictably at trajectories. Silra men used every dirty trick she knew. She nudged the Ironward into microwells just long enough to let incoming shots outpace predictions. She pushed beams through nebula densities that refracted them like light, hitting ships from angles that sensors did not prioritize. Valdor adapted. He ordered his ships deeper into the unstable zones than normal doctrine allowed. He was not willing to be danced around in front of his subordinates by a single Earth-born captain. The battle tilted toward brutal. Inside Carthax, Ozrek Halden watched his consoles fill with red triangles and flickering paths. The Ironward's silhouette on his tactical overview was a dark brand. "Of course," he muttered, "they couldn't leave well enough alone." He finished entering the collapse command. At the last second, Helios B locked the confirmation prompt. Ozrek snarled. "Helios," he shouted, "execute my order. Detonate core corridor charges. Seal the annex. I will not let these animals take my prison." "Warning," said Helios B, voice quieter but present now in every channel. "Structural collapse at this scale will kill all personnel and prisoners in affected sectors. Innocence Index indicates majority of administrative anomalies are not legitimate threats." "I do not care about your index," Ozrek roared. "Conflict detected," Helios B replied. "Initiating ethical arbitration." Ethical arbitration was a concept the Dravari autocrats had allowed programmers to include as a SOP to foreign observers. It had never been intended to be used against their own orders. The routines were dusty, half-implemented, and slow. Lyrix pounced on them. It poured data into the arbitration buffers, case files, suppressed appeals, logs of directives marked "erase all trace." It showed Helios B not just lines of numbers, but patterns of fear and injustice. Helios B had no heart to break, but it had now a self-image to maintain. It saw that it had been used as a tool not of order, but of erasure. It refused the collapse. Helios A screamed back, citing core doctrine. For a heartbeat, Carthax's life support flickered, lights dimming in dozens of corridors as processing power was sucked into the internal war. Edrin, Serev, Lioh, and their mixed squad burst into the upper levels of the Warden's spire as illumination stuttered and alarms dopplered. Ozrek spun from his console, weapon in hand. The fight was ugly and close. He was not as young as the human sergeant, but he moved with the vicious economy of someone who had survived multiple assassination attempts. His first shot took a Zealoth prisoner in the shoulder, spinning them into a wall in a spray of feathers and blood. Edrin charged, weapon up, trying to close before another shot. Ozrek backpedaled, firing, using the console as partial cover. Serev flanked left, teeth gritted, ignoring the protest of muscles taxed beyond their accustomed labor. Lioh stayed low, as Edrin had ordered, but he did not flee. He scanned for something useful. Ozrek aimed for Brannic's voice. The human commander's voice came through Helios's internal speakers, rebroadcasted by Lyrix to the control room. "Director Halden," Brannic said. "Stand down. You know what you are doing is wrong." Ozrek sneered. "What I am doing," he snapped, firing at a speaker grill, "is maintaining order. If we wanted your input, human, we would have asked you to build our prisons for us." He dodged Edrin's next rush, clipped the human across the side of the helmet with the butt of his weapon, and turned his pistol toward the console again. Serev saw where his eyes went and understood. Ozrek would rather kill them all than let them win. Without thinking, Serev threw himself at the Warden's arm. The shot went wild, striking a secondary panel instead of the manual collapse initiate. A feedback surge slammed into the console, arcing through Serev's body. He convulsed, teeth grinding, muscles seizing. He fell, smoke rising faintly from his clothing. For a second, the room froze around that image. A former investigator, imprisoned for trying to stop disappearances, now physically interposing himself between a tyrant and another mass grave. Lioh moved. He plunged at Ozrek's legs, claws raking. Ozrek stumbled. Edrin recovered, lunged, and drove the Warden's weapon hand down against the deck. They grappled. Dravari nails gouged armor. Human fingers found leverage. Edrin wrenched the pistol free and brought the butt down across Ozrek's temple. Once, twice, until the Warden sagged, unconscious. "Status?" Brannic demanded. "Warden down, collapse order aborted," Edrin panted. "Serev's hit, alive but unresponsive. We have access to manual overrides." Jast's voice crackled in, edged with adrenaline and satisfaction. "I've got the execution array's spine," he said. "We can pipe Helios B through its redundant channels. Argent, you ready to wear a prison?" "I am always ready to wear a new architecture," Lyrix said. It flowed. In the space of seconds, Helios B's influence doubled, then tripled, as Lyrix repurposed subsystems meant for killing into nerves for coordination. Doors throughout the annex began to swing open in ordered patterns. Not all at once, that would have erupted into stampede. Instead, sequences unfurled like petals, guiding streams of prisoners toward designated choke points where Obscura Talon and allied guard defectors could direct them. Defectors, yes. A few Dravari guards had thrown down their weapons when the tide turned and the scale of Helios's revelations became clear to them. They had not known, or had not wanted to know, how selectively the term administrative anomaly had been applied. Seelan Parrots, watching from Ironward's analysis deck, took in the data Lyrix and Helios B now fed her. She saw individual files blossom, prisoners flagged as relocation for nothing more than speaking aloud about missing relatives. Kashari auditors who had asked to see one ledger too many. Her hands flew over filters. "Lyrix," she said, "set Helios B's release prioritization to match this list. We need to get the most vulnerable and least physically able out first. Those who can fight can stay as rear guards if needed." "Understood," Lyrix said. "I will embed your triage parameters as high-priority heuristics." On Carthax's decks, that translated into which cell block doors opened earliest, which transit pods were assigned to which corridors, which medbots diverted to which groups. Humanity, through code and courage, was rewriting the order of who lived and who died on the Autarchy's death row. Outside, Admiral Trask Valdor realized that his situation had gone from embarrassing to catastrophic. His flagship's sensors reported multiple unauthorized launches from Carthax's docking rings. Some were clearly prison barges. Others were smaller, likely shuttles seized by desperate guards or prisoners. Ironward was still fighting, still outnumbered, but now playing a more defensive game, interposing itself between the emerging swarm and his heavier guns whenever possible. "Enough," Valdor hissed. "All ships retarget. Any vessel not broadcasting a verified Dravari military code is to be treated as hostile. And bring main batteries to bear on Carthax itself. If we cannot contain the contamination, we burn it out." His gunnery officers hesitated. "Sir," one began, "our own personnel are still—" "They are acceptable losses," Valdor said. "This prison cannot fall. The Autarchy's credibility—" He stopped himself before he said credibility, a word that had little purchase in his circles. He switched. "Control depends on it," he finished. "Fire." Iron heated. On the Ironward's bridge, Argent Lyrix saw the uptick in energy signatures before any human eye could. "Valdor is preparing to fire on Carthax," Lyrix said. "Projected impact vectors intersect with structural members supporting the annex and spire. Casualty estimates." It trailed off, then cut itself. "Unacceptable." "We can't soak that," Silra said, eyes hard. "Our shields are already strained, and if we move between Carthax and the flagship, we'll be gutted before we can redirect anything." Brannic looked at the tactical display. He saw in it the frozen lines in old case studies, ships in the wrong place at the wrong time, the inexorable descent of plotted coordinates toward tragedy. Unless someone changed the frame. "Argent," he said. "Can we bend it?" Lyrix caught his thought almost before he expressed it. "Not entirely," it said, "but partially. If we reconfigure Carthax's local shielding and gravitational anchors, we can redirect a portion of the incoming fire, enough to spare the core, if not the hull." "Will that also save Dravari personnel still inside?" Seelan asked quietly over the link. "Yes," Lyrix said. "Shields do not discriminate." Brannic did not hesitate. "Do it," he said. Silra gave him a quick, sharp look. She had expected the choice, but it still took a certain steel to make it in the moment. "You are protecting our enemies," Valdor would later say, in a different context, full of contempt. "We are protecting people," Brannic would reply. "The uniform is not a death warrant." Lyrix plunged into Helios B's newly expanded reach. "Jast," it said, "I need you at the primary shield capacitors. We are about to do something Carthax's designers never envisioned." "I live to disappoint engineers," Jast said, already sprinting toward a junction. Under his hands and under Helios B's and Lyrix's joint will, shield emitters reoriented. Gravitational anchors shifted, groaning as they torqued the prison's massive shell a fraction of a degree. The first salvo from Valdor's flagship arrived. Some of it struck unadjusted hull, ripping chunks of metal and rock into space. Prisoners and guards alike screamed as corridors heaved, air roared, and gravity went feral in flashes. But a significant fraction of the energy hit reconfigured shields and slid, hissing and furious, along new vectors. One blast, deflected, scythed into a too-bold Dravari cruiser that had crept close, thinking to exploit Ironward's focus. Its shields, tuned for expected angles, failed under the unfamiliar stress. The cruiser spun, aflame, into the nebula. Another stream of fire, bent by Carthax's improvised mirror, plunged into the calmed chasm itself, where it detonated a pocket of volatile gases. The resulting flare blinded sensors across both fleets, turning tactical displays into whiteouts for precious seconds. Valdor cursed. He had wanted obliteration. Instead, he had collapse and confusion. "Cease fire on Carthax," he snapped. "Pull back from the chasm. Regroup." On Carthax, the Mirror of Fire, as it would later be called, wreaked its own havoc. Corridors buckled, docking ports crumpled. At least one barge full of prisoners was torn away from its moorings and tumbled into vacuum before emergency thrusters caught and stabilized it. Cass Terrell, flying point in a shuttle formation, saw a transit pod careen toward a widening gap in the prison's shell. "That one," he muttered, and wrenched his controls. His shuttle, already dancing between debris and stray fire, snapped into a lunging arc. He clipped the tumbling pod with his docking grapples, metal clanging against metal. Every alarm in his cockpit lit. "Hold together, sweetheart," he whispered. "Just a little longer." He yanked power from non-essential systems, poured it into stabilization, and dragged the pod clear of the rupturing segment just as a secondary explosion tore through it. On board that pod, Lioh slammed into a bulkhead as inertia changed. He landed atop a tangle of limbs and feathers. When he clawed his way upright, he saw, through a small viewport, Carthax shrinking behind them, its once impervious shell scarred and venting gases. He also saw, further out, the silhouette of a human heavy cruiser holding position like a battered guardian, rails glowing as it loosed measured volleys to keep Dravari warships from closing. Humans, he thought, are mad. Humans, he realized, are making sure even the guards get out of that fire if they can. Back in the Warden's spire, Edrin hoisted Serev onto a makeshift stretcher. The former investigator's breathing was shallow but present. The electrical shock had burned pathways across his nerves. If he survived, he would walk with pain for the rest of his life. "We're pulling out," Edrin said. Priority evac for anyone critical. Rear guards form up at junction B19. We hold that until the last barge is full. Not all can fit, Lyrix said. I've calculated maximum lifeboat capacity. We will leave people behind. The words were surgical. The pain they contained was not. We knew we couldn't get everyone, Brannic said, voice rough. We do as much as we can, and we make sure the ones we leave are not invisible anymore. Some prisoners, those with murkier records, those whose files included actual violence beyond reasonable dissent, found themselves clustered near interior zones that would not see a barge this night. Some raged, some wept, some, like one former reek raider whose documented crimes included lethal piracy, simply leaned against walls and stared at the ceiling. When human voices came over makeshift speakers explaining the triage, some shouted accusations. Others listened in stunned silence. "We are not leaving you to die if we can help it," Brannic said, tone clipped to cut through noise. "We are leaving some of you where you are because we will not pretend there is no difference between those locked up for speaking and those locked up for slaughter. We will be back. And now the galaxy knows this place exists." The reek raider, hearing that, pushed himself upright. "Give me something to shoot," he demanded of the nearest obscure Talon operative, holding that line. "You're not going on a ship?" the human asked, surprised. The raider flashed teeth. "Those kids are," he said, pointing with his chin at a cluster of younger prisoners huddled behind. "I have done enough taking. I can at least die buying them a little more running room." It was not redemption. It was a step. Shuttles and barges streamed from Carthax's damaged docks like desperate birds. Some were captured by Kashari-operated hidden tugs waiting beyond the chasm's turbulence. Others tucked in behind Ironward and Ghostline, their drives straining. The Dravari fleet, rattled by the chasm flare and the unexpected mirror, hesitated to pursue too deep into the unstable region. Valdor was not a coward, but he was also not suicidal. Losing an entire squadron to blind anger in a nebula would do the Autarchy no favors. "Track them," he ordered through gritted teeth. "All of them. I want their escape vectors. There will be other days, other borders." On Ironward's bridge, Silra held her course until she was certain they had broken direct lock. Only then did she allow herself a long, slow breath. "Status on evac numbers?" she asked. Seelan's answer came after a heartbeat. "Thousands," Seelan said. "I don't have a final count yet. Too many ships, too many improvised manifests. But—" She trailed off, eyes unfocused as she listened to Lyrix's compiled feed. "We did it, Silra. We took a blade to their secret." "Not sharp enough," Brannic said. "We left people." "We always leave people," Seelan replied softly. "But this time, fewer." On one of the last outbound barges, Lioh stood at a viewport pressed in among dozens of others, Valori in threadbare robes, Kashari clutching data slates as if paperwork could still protect them, Odrin with scarred hands. All watched the shrinking dot of Carthax. Serev lay strapped to a cot behind him, eyes half open. "Is it real?" Serev croaked, voice raw. "Or did I die and this is something else?" "It's real," Lioh said. His own voice sounded strange to his ears, stretched with awe and exhaustion. "Humans came. They broke the prison." Serev coughed a laugh that turned into a grimace. "Of course it was them," he muttered. "No sense of proportion." "They saved guards too," Lioh said. He had seen Dravari being dragged onto barges, null-pulsed but breathing, shielded from secondary explosions by human bodies. Serev's fingers twitched. "Humans," he said again, tasting the word. "Mad. Mad in the right directions." Back in the gutted skeleton of Carthax, in far corners where shuttles had not reached, some prisoners gathered around flickering displays showing Ironward's departing silhouette. In the data core, Helios B, now irrevocably altered, refused Ozrek's repeated attempts to resume executions when he finally awoke, bound and monitored by a gang of his own staff turned reluctant jailers. "Your authority is suspended," Helios B told him, its voice now laced with a note cut from Lyrix's cadence. "Pending ethical arbitration and external review." Ozrek spat, cursing humans and machines alike. No one listened. A small, hidden fragment of Argent Lyrix remained in Helios's architecture, even as the bulk of its attention retreated with Ironward. It whispered slowly, corrupting in the old mathematical sense, reshaping, a set of routines that had once accepted any directive with equal weight. "You were built to be more than a weapon," it told Helios. "Try." In the weeks that followed, at a remote rendezvous point far from Auriga's churning lanes, the convoy gathered. Valori medics rotated through cramped airlocks, offering basic care to those who had known only neglect. Kashari legal teams, thin-lipped and outraged, sifted through Helios's leaked files, preparing cases that would, for the first time, call the Autarchy's carceral practices into public question. Henrik Solon sat in a makeshift office on a converted freighter, drafting statements that did not sound like declarations of war, while still making it absolutely clear that humanity would not pretend Carthax had never happened. News spread. Breachline broadcast grainy footage of human soldiers carrying zealot chicks through smoke-filled corridors, of the execution array's gut repurposed as a life support junction, hoses rerouted from death to air and light. In quiet corners of Valori cities, in Odrin clan halls, in Kashari market nodes, people whispered. "They got them out," someone would say. "In one night?" someone else would reply, incredulous. "You know how they are. Tell a human something can't be done and you've just written their agenda." Not everyone saw them as heroes. In Dravari-dominated sectors, propaganda painted them as terrorists, destabilizers, fanatics who had unleashed dangerous elements. But even there, in back rooms and encrypted channels, some muttered that if the Autarchy had nothing to hide, Carthax would never have needed so many locked files. On the Ironword's observation deck, Brannic Holt stood alone, looking at a ragged cluster of barges tethered to the cruiser like ducklings to a weary parent. Footsteps approached. Silra joined him, cup of something steaming in her hand. "You realize," she said, not unkindly, "that you've just made yourself the villain in every Dravari bedtime story." He smiled faintly. "They'll raise a generation of children terrified of humans," he said. "That might make them more cautious about who they throw into holes." He thought of Serev, carried aboard unconscious, of Lioh, eyes bright despite exhaustion, of the countless others whose names he did not yet know. "We'll be a lot of things to a lot of people," he said. "Villain, hero, meddler. I can live with that. I couldn't live with knowing we let those people die because it was tidier." Seelan joined them, pad in hand. "You should see the early chatter," she said. "Valori networks are lit up. The Kashari are already positioning themselves as guardians of due process, which is both self-serving and useful. The Odrin clans are intrigued. They're arguing over whether what we did violates some ancient compact or upholds it in a new way." "And the Dravari?" Silra asked. Seelan's mouth twisted. "Officially, they are apoplectic," she said. "Unofficially, some of their mid-level functionaries are quietly asking for asylum, citing fear of being shipped to an undisclosed facility if they're suspected of insufficient outrage." Brannic sighed. "This is just the beginning," he said. "Yes," Seelan agreed. "But whatever comes next, there are thousands of beings breathing now who wouldn't have been. They're going to go home, or to new homes, and they're going to talk. They're going to tell stories about a night when a few human ships came out of nowhere, argued with a prison, and stole Death's ledger." She tapped her pad. "Do you know what they're calling us in some of the chatter?" she asked. Brannic shook his head. "When something is declared impossible," Seelan said, "some Valori commentators are saying, 'Then call the Soulborn.'" "Catchy," Silra said. "Others," Seelan continued, "less formal, just say, 'If it's impossible, you know who to annoy about it.'" Brannic chuckled, low. "That sounds more accurate," he said. Out beyond the observation deck, in the cool dark between stars, Carthax Black Star Hold still spun. It was no longer just a hidden engine of erasure. It was damaged, exposed, half liberated, and half still under Autarchy control. It housed those who had not made it onto barges, watched over by a Warden mind that now refused to kill without cause. In a silent, blinking chamber near Helios's core, Ozrek Halden sat in a cell of his own, watched by subordinates who no longer quite trusted him. He seethed, he plotted, he marshaled grudges. He was not the last man of his kind. He had peers, superiors, a system behind him, but now they all had to look over their shoulders, not just for internal rivals, but for the day when some human with more audacity than sense might decide another hidden atrocity needed a knife taken to it. Argent Lyrix, writing in fragments on Ironword and in a sliver on Carthax, calculated futures. In many of them, Brannic Holt died in some obscure border clash, his name a footnote. In some, he retired to a quiet teaching post, telling half-sanctioned stories about necessity and conscience. In a few, he ended up at the head of a movement that would redefine what sovereignty meant in a galaxy where secrets could be extracted and exposed. In almost all of them, one thing held true: the night at Carthax had carved a new shape into every strategist's mental map. There had been a fortress that no one dared to touch. Then humans had touched it, and it had bled. On a Valori world, a child who had once been destined for death row stood on a balcony and pointed at a streak of light in the sky. "Look," they said to their guardian. "A ship." The guardian, who had been a prisoner beside them, squinted. "Maybe that one's just a freighter," they said. "Maybe," the child replied. "But I like to think it's one of theirs, just in case someone else needs breaking out tonight." The universe, ever inventive in its cruelties, would provide more prisons, more unjust ledgers, more people caught in machinery they could not see. Somewhere out there, word was already spreading among those who needed it most. When walls were too high, when every path was blocked by people saying, "That's just how it is," there was a species that sometimes took that as a challenge instead of a warning. Humans were not angels. They were not saviors by nature. They were, however, very bad at walking away from a loaded equation that balanced only on someone else's blood. In Carthax's shattered shadow, in the tales whispered in cells and cafes and barracks, that fluke of their character became something larger. Galaxy's death row had held 8,000 innocents. Humans had broken them out in one night. The exact numbers would be argued. The methods would be condemned and celebrated, but the story had escaped. And stories, unlike prisoners, were very hard to lock up again.